Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 4th of August 2015, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, I'm pleased to say, Justin Walker. Justin is visiting the West Country, bit of sunshine today, so he's got on a particularly smart pair of reddish trousers.
Yes, my wife's choice and my daughter's choice, and I like them very much indeed, so that's for the record.
So you've got a Conservative top and a pretty hard Labour pair of trousers on, but we'll come on to that in due course when we mention Mr Corbyn. And Mike Robinson is behind the technical desk. We're also going to be joined by live Skype video link with Neelu Chowdhury, who's going to be talking about yet another of these horrific cases of people being deliberately put into psychiatric institutions when they try and fight the state taking their children. Well, I've given a little bit of the weather already. It's quite nice and sunny down here in Devon. It's pretty wet in Rhondda. Norfolk's not giving me any comment at all. So I'm going to say variable across UK. Hope we've got that right.
I believe it's very wet in the Yorkshire Dales too, so I'm not missing it.
Okay. It's August, it's summer. We should expect a general mix of weather. Well, we're going to kick off today with the BBC because, of course, we might expect the BBC to be very big on the fact that it's alleged, I think is the best way to put this, it is alleged that the Metropolitan Police are investigating Edward Heath over child abuse. Just emphasise this point, fresh from failing to investigate a range of abuse cases, the Met bigs up Met claims to be investigating Ted Heath. We've heard this time and time again from the Metropolitan Police that they are supposedly investigating child abuse. We see no results, but now we've got the opportunity to get back into Ted Heath. Now, some people would say this is just to try and say that all abuse is historic. Well, that may be true, but of course, Ted Heath is the key to the child abuse at the establishment political level, and it starts to get into some extremely interesting and very dark areas where foreign powers were controlling senior British politicians by the blackmail abuse of children. Now, we've got to watch the time today, Justin, but do you want any comment on that?
I'm just going to say I've known about Ted Heath's antics for something like 15, 20 years since the rumours started coming out, so it's taken an awful long time for the police to wake up to something wrong.
And indeed, our intelligence services, who we are led to believe knew nothing about this at all. This is the thing to come back with. We're paying millions of pounds for British secret services, special branch, SO19, all of these organisations supposedly to protect the country, but no, they simply didn't know anything was going on. Can't be true. And if we just move on to Exaro, Exaro's having to do a little bit of pussyfooting around Kenneth Clarke, because of course Mr Clarke has come back and said, well, Yorkshire Police have assured him that they are not now and have never in the past investigated him for any allegation of sexual abuse or any other crime. So Exaro was alleging that police had actually come forward and said that there was another investigation, I believe, concerning a 14-year-old boy. This was mentioned in some of the pre-discussion for Ben Fellowes' trial. But a spokeslady for Kenneth Clarke is now saying, well, this is clearly not true because South Yorkshire Police have assured Mr Clarke. Exaro is countering by saying that when they've asked South Yorkshire Police for clarification, they've actually said they can neither confirm nor deny that they are carrying out any investigations. So what would we say? I think we would say, what a wonderful smokescreen of obfuscation. But clearly we're watching two variations of the law in Britain. We've got the law for ordinary people, and clearly we've got another type of law for those who are in positions of power and influence. But we were reminded by a viewer this morning that, of course, it was The Sun that was originally saying, well, we need to have a look into Jimmy Savile because he was given the keys to Broadmoor under the reign of Ken Clarke. Now, what's interesting, of course, is the BBC is certainly not delving into that line of inquiry. They would prefer to go down Ted Heath. Pretty sad state of affairs, Justin, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it is all coming out with the wash now. It is all coming out, but what I'm fearful of is what those in behind the scenes are trying to engineer as this information comes out. What is their real agenda behind the scenes? So I'm watching very carefully what's going to happen
as it opens up.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the subject is children, the abuse of children, paedophile rings in places of power. And one of the things that UK Column has been warning about over many years is the state simply stealing children from parents, those children disappearing into the so-called care system, where we know many of them have been abused over the years and indeed still are. Now, I think we'll bring in Neelu Chowdhury, who's going to talk to us about the extraordinary case of a man who was effectively threatened by his own GP that if he didn't do the right thing with social services, he'd simply be put into a mental institution. No, this is not Stasi Germany, it's not Stalinist Russia. This is Britain under David Cameron's Conservative government in 2015. Neelu, thanks for joining us. What can you tell us?
The case of Patrick Coyle in Northern Ireland is that he actually suspected something was going on because they were monitoring his family, his breakup with his wife, or they caused the breakup with his wife. Then they caused the two daughters to be given to the wife, whom they know that she can't look after them. So the girl's been put at risk. And the two boys, they're targeting the two boys when he asked for the return of his two daughters. The GP, there's a recording, the GP is threatening him that if he tries to get the two daughters back, then he would be sectioned under the, and if he refuses to hand over the two boys, and if he issues a commercial lien to get his remedy for the return of the daughters, then he would be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So at this point, Patrick Coyle sacked his GP, said, I don't want anything further to do with you. The GP during the consultation has phoned the social worker, David Gervin, and phoned the police to come and arrest him in the surgery. So the police are acting as agents of the GP, and the social workers are as well. But then what happens is that he drives off before they could arrive, and he's gone to a friend's for a couple of days. Sorry, to his cousins. And then he's come back home, and he's found out that his 13-year-old boy, who was staying with a friend, was hunted down by police in a field where he was hiding from the kidnappers. And then the police surrounded his house, Patrick Coyle's house, for 5 hours in about 20 police cars, he said, terrorizing the 7-year-old. Now, the 7-year-old was in the doctor's surgery whilst the GP was threatening him and making him feel like an animal. And now, so the police have put the 13-year-old and the 7-year-old into care. They've put Patrick Coyle in a mental health hospital at Silverwood, part of the Southern Health and Social Care Trust in South Tyrone. And he's been admitted to the mental health hospital. As the consultant of the trust who saw him said she could see no mental health issues on him, but she was following orders. So the same GP that Patrick Coyle had sacked, GP Peter Sabharwal, that's Sabherwal, he came and admitted him whilst being sacked. So Patrick Coyle has done the commercial lien, and that's gone out to the hospital. Mental health director Francis Rice. There's been communication with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, that is Theresa Villiers, this morning, and to try to get the remedy of the return of Patrick Coyle home with his 4 children. He has left the door open for his wife, who has a spending addiction problem, so that he can be a family, can have the proper support for her and be a family again. He's worried for his life. He thinks they're trying to kill him. They've tried to sneak psychotic medication, and they've tried to label him with paranoid schizophrenia. So it's a common story. He said he's met other people on the ward who've got in the same scenario. He doesn't believe that he's going to, they've got any intention of discharging him normally. They tried to give him the drugs to take home yesterday. They're playing with him, saying, we're going to let you go home. Then they change their mind. They're trying to alienate him from his friends. They took his mobile phone off him yesterday. They broke his phone and gave it back to him broken, so they've not been able to contact anybody. They're not taking any calls. They're hanging up on us. They're acting like a bunch of criminals. They're a law unto themselves, and it's clear they're not public servants. They're not acting with honour. They're not serving or protecting the public. We've got criminals in public service. They're not. They don't have any allegiance to God, and all public servants who don't have allegiance to God do have an allegiance to Satan. So anybody who's a Freemason, anybody who's belonging to any cults, any Satanists or Luciferians, they need to be removed from public office right now, right this moment.
And Nilu, this is a horrific story, one which the UK column has heard this type of story before. I can simply reel off some names. We had the case of Emma in Cornwall, who reported paedophile activity around a primary school. She was put into a psychiatric unit. They were threatening to forcibly medicate her. We've got another lady called Sue. She's actually in another psychiatric unit at the moment. So that's 3 times that she's been put in a psychiatric unit. What was her crime to try and defend her daughter against paedophile grooming? Anne Gregg, mother of Holly Gregg, of course, was drugged unconscious and then woke up to find herself in a psychiatric unit shortly after she had blown the whistle on the abuse of Holly Gregg. And we had another mother herself called Holly in Oxford who tried to protect her daughter from abuse from abusive members of the family. Social services turned on that mother, and Holly was put into a psychiatric unit in Oxford. So this appears now to be a common tactic in Britain of 2015. I remember this very well. This was part of what military people were briefed about in the 70s and 80s, because of course this was the darkest, deepest secrets, you'll remember this, Justin,
yes,
of the Soviet Union, the
East
Gulag.
Germany, yeah.
And the Gulag was a mixture of prisons, internment camps, political camps, and of course the psychiatric hospitals. And here we are in David Cameron's Conservative Britain in 2015, and you are describing yet another case of people within the state apparatus simply dragging people into psychiatric units. Can I just ask, how much support have you got for this gentleman at the moment, and how successful have you been in publicising his plight at the moment?
We've done quite a few radio shows on freedomtalkradio.co.uk with Andy Peacher. He's inviting volunteers, hosts, guests to become involved with similar cases and to do their own radio shows. We're working with a group in America. They're recruiting judges. That website is www.4cd.org. And then there's the itnj.org, and those are the American organisations. They've got a branch in the UK. They've got itnj, committee.org. They're training people to become sheriffs. We've got nationallibertyalliance.org. But that's just kind of for the global education of people to assume that the authorities as their own sheriffs and judges and peace officers and these groups, the teams, rescue teams, are going to have to rescue these children who've been kidnapped into these satanic cults. They're trafficking these children through the care system, which we know are big prostitution, pornography, and paedophile industries. We know that. They're doing this because the corporations, they think they're above the law. They think it's because profit, that they think profit goes above honour and their oaths to serve and protect. So that's why the commercial lien process, it ceases and desists, ceases their trading, seizes their assets, and informs their insurance companies that there are public liability claims on their insurance companies in the sum of £100 million in the case of Patrick Coyle, for each of his kids and for himself. So the insurance company are going to have to pay out, and it's only when you talk money that they understand what where you're coming from, and then they listen. But otherwise, there is no public service. The whole public service in the UK is being run by satanic cults. They have no allegiance to God. They have no allegiance to serve and protect the public.
Right. Nilu, thank you very much for that. We have done some interviews with you in the past, which are becoming, the time is right, I think, for us to be broadcasting some of those. And I know that you're doing some fantastic work to do with the abuse of children and how it's operating the public sector. We'd love to have you back on UK Column for a full session, because I know you can tell us a lot. But if we'll just end there on that note, because that dovetails in extremely well with the rest of our news today, and we'll invite you to comment on some of the articles from here on. So stay with us if you can. Just incredible, isn't it, that the country that many servicemen and women spent a large amount of time under some quite arduous conditions over the years, thinking that while they were doing the bit to defend their country, in fact the people attacking the country have been our own politicians. It's hard, isn't it?
We've let in the Trojan horse. The horse is now, the enemy is now amongst us, and it's so sad when you look at all the people dumbed down with trivia, and including some of our ex-service people who must now surely be waking up to the fact that things are not right.
I think we can answer that question and say they certainly are. We're getting more and more reports that people at the higher levels of the Ministry of Defence and the military are simply stunned at what's going on. We know that debates are taking place, particularly with Cameron and Mr. Letwin, which are about a uniform level of forces across the European Union. This, of course, is paving the way for European armed forces, European army, and the British public simply not being told anything.
Well, we know the regular army is destined for more cuts. The Navy, well, what can I say? I mean, you are
as little as possible.
I just find the whole thing very, very sad, but I'm hoping that good people will come together and good people will organise, and with the Bradbury and everything else that we've got to discuss, we can take on the 1% and put them back in their box.
I think we can. Exposure's the biggest weapon. Let's have a look at what David Cameron is really pushing in Britain today. An extraordinary article from The Express about this lovely lady, Khudela Leekens. She's very particular about how you pronounce her name. I think her first name is something to do with goodness, but who knows. She is a sexologist. She's a UN Goodwill Ambassador for sexual health, and she's been invited into a British school in order to teach the children about hardcore pornography, as it says here, oral sex, and a whole range of other things. And the 2-week course is going to be filmed by Channel 4. It's going to be broadcast as Sex in the Class, and the 15 and 16-year-old boys and girls are going to be undertaking homework. For example, the boys are asked to make a work of art out of female genitalia, while the girls are told to examine themselves with a handheld mirror. Several schoolboys in the class make shocking confessions to the camera about how much pornography they watch and detail the explicit nature of many of the scenes. Yes, this is absolutely real. Yes, this is happening. And this woman, whose only qualifications are she apparently used to be a beauty queen, clearly that's faded, has now become an expert on sex, and she is sexualising British children. Can it get worse? Well, of course it can, because the school is actively promoting this. Here's head teacher Steve Campbell. It's the Hollins Technology College. Just to make sure we know exactly what's coming, The Accrington Observer had this to say: the show will see a classroom of 15 to 16-year-old pupils tackling everything from hardcore pornography to sexual pleasure, and throughout the course of the programme, viewers will see how the pupils and their parents react, how the pupils fare in their exams in the course, and if Hudella will manage to get a message about sex education across. Well, do have a look at this woman. I just went for a quick look on her Twitter page, and of course here she is boasting about the fact she's now got a television show coming up. But let's remember this man. He is Graham Stewart, MP, Chair of the Commons Education Committee. He's all for this. He's met her, he's had a debate with her, and he quipped, "Have I just shaken hands to be an advocate for sexual pleasure?" So where is this revolting stuff coming from? Well, of course, it's coming with the approval of David Cameron's Conservative government. So we'd just like to say once again, the only sensible thing for people to do if you want to sexualise and ultimately abuse your own children is to vote Conservative. Justin, what can you say when you see this sort of stuff?
I mean, what can you say? I'm lost for words, and I'm not usually one easily lost for words. It's just in your face now. Everywhere you look, their agenda is in our faces, and they're going flat out for it. I'm just disgusted by it. I mean,
there's no attempt to hide it, is there?
There isn't, and I'm just looking at the state of that MP. I mean, he doesn't quite look to me to be the sharpest pin in the box, or whatever the phrase is.
Well, you could also say something about the smile.
The smile. I mean,
idiotic,
always cross between the village idiot and something quite sinister. But anyway, that's
yeah. But this is David Cameron, of course. Michael Gove we had as the Education Secretary.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, you know, something you said there was quite interesting. We get the opportunity to watch, to see the reaction of the children and the parents to this stuff. So what we're actually doing is televising some lab rats. So we're going to expose children to this material, and then we're going to watch the reaction.
Yeah.
That's not a very, aside from the sexualization aspect to it, that's equally devious and pretty nasty.
I think it sounds perverted. I just think the whole thing's horrible.
I think so. Well, before I just give Nilu the chance to comment, let's just show you this added bit. This is the Express. This is from the web page which showed this article. Here it is: shock as teenagers taught about hardcore porn. But what I noticed is that what has the Express done? Well, it's labelled the top of that is all soft porn. So what we've got here, in my opinion, we're nudging the public mind from soft porn over to teaching children about hardcore porn. And then the really nasty bit is down in this bottom right-hand corner. That's a picture of a big flea. And what the article is saying is that the immigrants coming into this country are all dirty flea carriers. Yeah. This is the crude propaganda that was put out by the Nazi Party. Never mind whether these people should or should not be coming into the country. We are labelling them as dirty, flea-ridden individuals. This is vicious propaganda by the Express, sexualisation of Britain's children, and pointing at people, many of whom are fleeing poverty and distress, and these are flea carriers. Nilu, what's your comment on this?
Brian, you know, the mainstream media, their newspapers and their TV, they try to get consent by putting this stuff out, and if you don't object, you've acquiesced to it. So that then becomes policy. So if we don't really want to consent to all of this, I think that we've got to protect our children from television and newspapers and these teachers who support these kind of experiments, human experiments. And I just find it a dangerous situation whereby we're giving these satanic cult members, the parliamentarians, they all have to be Satanists in order for them to be in power, because this is how the structure is. So it's very sad that the mainstream media is the puppy of the satanic structure, and we've got no chance if we're going to acquiesce to this, i.e., be contracted to this. So we need to actually sever all ties with all mainstream media, and just ignore them totally, and don't give them any power that they think that they have, and then just deem them criminals, which is what they are. The fact is, they never find the, say, satanic cult members who are doing all the cannibalizing, raping, sodoming, and vampirizing babies. They can't find them, but what they can do is they can find them when they've died, or they can call it historic when they make out that it's not happening today, but it is. Millions of satanic cult members, they are eating babies, they're raping babies, they're doing that all the time, and the mainstream news is not interested in that. They're not interested in the reality of this parallel lines that we have. It's them against us.
Nilu, I couldn't agree more. The them against us is exactly what it is. Let's just have a look here at Mr. Cameron. This article from the Telegraph: MP use anti-terror powers on Christian teachers who say gay marriage is wrong. So even Keith Wood, who is director of the National Secular Society, says if extremism disruption orders really could be used to prevent teachers from talking about same-sex marriage unless they're inciting violence, they're an even greater threat to freedom of expression than I had feared. To suggest that EDOs guarantee freedom of expression is not just inaccurate, is the opposite of the truth. They are the biggest threat to freedom of expression I have ever seen in Britain. And Simon Calvert, Deputy Director of the Christian Institute, said, I am genuinely shocked that we have an MP, that's Mr. Mark Spencer, shown top right, supporting the idea of teachers being branded extremists for teaching that marriage is between a man and a woman. So here is Cameron absolutely going to brand anybody who disagrees with his views as an extremist. I'd just like to draw your attention to the British Constitution newsletter, which has gone out in the last few days, because in this is Cameron's speech on this issue of extremism. The whole speech we've released, and if you go through that document, you will actually find that he is creating a dictatorship, and anybody who holds traditional moral values, whatever religion you adhere to, he is going to do something about it. Mike?
But equally dangerous here, aside from the use of extremist views here, is the use of these orders of various kinds. And so they put legislation in place which allows people who are unqualified to issue these orders. And we were talking about this with the OPOB news organisation yesterday, the fact that an order which was designed for antisocial behaviour is being used completely beyond the authority of that order, is being used to silence free speech. And here we have another type of order without any kind of judicial process being used to silence free speech.
Well, here's the man, Mr. Cameron, and what was he saying in that speech? We need everyone, government, local authorities, police, schools, all of us, to enforce our values right across the spectrum, non-violent and violent. Second, as we counter this ideology, a key part of our strategy must be to tackle both parts of the creed, the non-violent and the violent. But the real message is the state view is to be adopted by all government and all public bodies. If as an individual you do not agree with the government view, that's what our view really is as far as Mr. Cameron's concerned, you are a terrorist and will be subject to anti-terrorist controls, including suppression of free speech. And really, to come in on the back of what Nilu has just said, when we think about David Cameron's conservative values, let's have a look at them, because I had to list a few: lies, suppression of free speech, blind eye to child abuse, especially in Westminster, treason, selling off public assets for profit, betrayal of the armed forces, deliberate undermining of the NHS, attacks on Christianity, sexualisation of our children, unlawful overseas wars and participation in torture. So these people, Nilu's described them as Satanists. I can quite agree with that sentiment. There is nothing of any true spiritual value in these people. Disgraceful, disgusting politicians. But of course, what do they feed off? They feed off money.
Yeah.
And what better place to go back to that newsletter to have a look at this graph. Over to you, Justin and Mike.
Well, right, okay, where to begin? It's just appalling that all the political parties have handed over their sovereign right to issue and control their own debt-free and interest-free money based on the wealth of a nation. And what this graph clearly shows is that the private banks have created all the money that is currently in circulation, mainly as debt, and we, the taxpayers at the moment, to address our debt, our national debt, for the interest alone, we're having to find £1 billion a week. It's £52 billion a year just thrown away, given to the private bankers who have created that money completely out of thin air. So it's insanity, absolute insanity.
Right. And if I just bring in the second graph there, Mike, if you pop that one back, this one's got cumulative monthly public spending. So what we're just seeing is that we are being told a complete pack of lies about austerity, which of course is driving every cutback going, complete pack of lies. And it's easily provable by the fact that it's the private banks controlling the money supply.
Exactly. And it's been handed to them by the political parties, all of them, Lib Dem, Labour, Conservative, a lot of them.
Right. Well, there's been quite a bit of discussion in the UK Column office this morning about this gentleman, Mr. Corbyn. Mike, what's your thoughts on this gentleman at the moment?
Well, as we said yesterday, he has quite a few questions to answer with regard to his potential covering up of child abuse in Islington, one of the real hotbeds of child abuse over the last 30, 40 years. He's been an MP there for many, many years. He is openly a supporter of splitting up the banks properly, which is a good thing. He's in principle openly a supporter of national credit because he signed the early day motion was it the year before last, Justin?
That's right. I've got the text here, actually. I want to read it out to people.
On the Bradbury Pound.
Yeah.
But in more recent days, he seems to be heading towards the positive money direction, which for us doesn't seem to be the right way to go.
Right.
Well, could I perhaps read that the early day motion 748, and I'll be very brief. And it was sponsored by Jeremy Corbyn, backed by Paul Flynn, Kelvin Hopkins, John McDonnell, and Austin Mitchell, who is no longer an MP. That this House notes that the 100th anniversary of the Bradbury Pound on 7th of August 2014 is a welcome reminder of the historical precedent for public credit, what we call national credit, as the sound basis for debt and interest-free treasury money, and therefore the sound alternative to the national debt and interest-bearing bank money. Congratulates the Forum for Stable Currencies, that was an organisation that we are aware of, for having promoted the public credit since 2002, and urges HM Treasury to follow John Bradbury's model and address social, economic and political issues across party lines in one fell swoop and avoid wholly unnecessary austerity cuts. In other words, what he is supporting is the reintroduction of the Bradbury Pound as happened in 1914, because he recognises that austerity is nothing but a great big lie. And unfortunately, he's gone down the path of something called people's quantitative easing, which is something that has been put forward by Positive Money and Ben Dyson in particular. And it's very sad because I've had correspondence and communication with Ben Dyson, and he just refuses to look at the big picture concerning money supply throughout the world. And one organisation he will not look at is the Bank for International Settlements. And the Bank for International Settlements is a network of 60 central banks, including the Bank of England, including the Federal Reserve, and effectively controls 95% of the world's money supply. Now, it's a highly secretive organisation. You've heard me talk about this before. But there it is, having its bi-monthly meetings. And one of those, obviously, Mark Carney, our governor of the Bank of England, is there. And would you believe that Dave Prentice, who is the General Secretary of Unison with 1.3 million members, who is now actively supporting Jeremy Corbyn's bid to become the Labour leader. But here we have Dave Prentice, who is a Labour leader, is actually a director of the Bank of England. But is he privy to what's really going on? Because what's going on behind the scenes is you've got the Bank for International Settlements is controlled by the big banking families and effectively controlling 95% of the world's money supply in complete, utter secrecy. And here is Dave Prentice backing Jeremy Corbyn. I'm sorry, the whole thing is so complicated when it needn't be. So I've got real questions to ask about who's advising Jeremy, and I really hope Jeremy will and his campaign team will talk to us about the Bradbury so we can sort of straighten out these problems. Because trust me, at the way things are going at the moment, Jeremy is simply backing the system, and there's not going to be any real change to austerity.
Right.
Well, this was a problem that I did have with the Positive Money campaign for quite a long time. So I wrote that article in 2011, and making many of the points that you've just made. Now, I didn't mention the Bank for International Settlements because actually I didn't feel that I needed to go there in order to make the point. I've made this point many times on this program, and I'll make it again now. The main point of this article is the fact that the Bank of England is effectively a privately run, because it has total independence, a privately run wholesale bank. It has many customers other than the government, and including other heads of state. We've no idea where their interests actually lie, whether there are any conflicts of interest when they make decisions that affect us in the day-to-day. Now, we've just put somebody in prison for 14 years for manipulating the interbank lending rate, LIBOR. But the fact of the matter is that when I asked the Bank of England, that's a very simple question. How do we know as members of the public that when you make decisions on interest rates, for example, that you're making those decisions on the basis of the interests of the nation and not on the interests of one of your other customers? How do we know that there is no conflict of interest there? And their answer basically was, in a nutshell, we wouldn't do that. And I'm afraid that, for me, just didn't wash. So the whole issue with Positive Money, which we can say is going in generally the right direction, but the big problem is that they refuse to discuss this issue of central banking, and the fact that the central banking system is the core of the problem. And if we don't deal with central banking and with the banking system, then we're not actually fixing anything.
Mike, one of the things I wanted to add into this conversation was that the Daily Telegraph a few days ago published an extremely interesting article on the Bank of International Settlements. They were drawing on a published work, a book, but in it they got back to what was actually going on prior to the Second World War, during the Second World War, where it was being demonstrated that the Bank of International Settlements was acting essentially against the British, against Britain and the Allies in the way they were providing support to the Nazi system. So we've got a lot of information now starting to come out. It's not just a matter of corrupt banks. We've got something deeply political going on as well. And I think it's also fascinating that we've got what do we call the man who's been imprisoned, Mike? Is he a trader?
He was a trader.
A trader.
Yes.
So he gets a 14-year prison sentence, but the people running these banks have simply been carrying on as normal, getting help from public money and bigger and better bonuses. Outrageous.
Well, if I had my way, Interpol will be going into the offices at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel and arresting the whole damn lot of them, because I think this guy is just a patsy, a fool guy.
Hopefully that will happen. We keep pushing it out. Mike, of course, austerity on the big lie. We need cuts and mergers.
Let's just say you heard it here first, folks, because we've been warning about this for about 2-3 months now, that the Scottish model for policing would be moved to the rest of the UK, and here we're starting to see it now. It's going to begin in Nottingham, hotbed of the worst behaviour in the country, I think. The Nottinghamshire Police are going to start merging services, and certainly this report from Sky News suggesting that initially, beginning with some of the smaller police forces, these police forces are going to merge, and we're going to end up with one police force, really, aren't we? And of course, the way that the police are organised in this country at the moment, if you have a problem with one police force, it is, although as unlikely as it is that you'll get any particular help, but there is at least the notional idea that you can go to another police force and begin an investigation into corruption in the first. Of course, you can't do that if there aren't multiple police forces.
Police Scotland, classic example, the merger of I believe it was the 8 Scottish police districts into one big police force, accountable only to themselves. Nilu, I'm watching the clock. We've got just over 4 minutes to run, but if you'd like a quick comment on the banks or indeed the police, because I know that you are well aware of the way the police function at the moment.
Oh, sorry.
On both points, that the financial system is in the West, the paper financial system outside of the gold standard. If they were honourable towards the people, they would never have let us go into debt, because they could just create as much electronic money as they wanted. So the fact is that they've actually dishonoured the rest of the planet. After the 1930 bankruptcy of the Statelessness Treaty, the Geneva Convention, and the League of Nations, this country has been printing paper money outside of the Uniform Commercial Code and dishonouring the rest of the planet. So the rest of the planet, the gold became redundant, and therefore, until we come under the gold standard, and there is gold distribution proposals that everyone gets the same amount of gold, which is about £3 million each. And then we can stop dishonouring the rest of the world, and we don't have to then become enslaved by the same system that they enslaved the rest of the planet. UK got affected because it was the last stop for the satanic paper train. So I would say that the whole public service, the whole of the financial system, it is designed to enslave the people, and we've had enough of it, and we need to go back to being uniform all around the world.
Okay, Nilu, thank you for that. And I know you've done a lot of research into this fascinating subject of Britain being bankrupt now for many years. We will give you a decent slot on that. Well, Mike, we had a slide here on Tom Hayes, the so-called victory for the UK Serious Fraud Office.
This is a big victory, according to the Financial Times, for the Serious Fraud Office. I would just say it's nothing of the sort. They have picked one patsy, and he's gone to prison for 14 years. The activities that he was engaged in still quite happily going on at the moment. I'm pretty confident about saying that. The Serious Fraud Office have failed to prosecute anybody of any real value within the banking system. So this is no victory at all for the Serious Fraud Office.
Okay.
Could I just very quickly say that had the jury heard what we know, that guy would not have been found guilty, probably.
Well, it could well be. I mean, Mike's got the other part of it here, is that while this trader gets put in prison for 14 years, the Chancellor is simply getting away with...
Well, he's getting away
fraud.
with theft. It's a kleptocracy, isn't it? Because this is just 7% of the public stake in RBS sold off yesterday. It was a fire sale. They raised 2.1 billion and they lost 1 billion because they sold it for 1 billion less than they paid for it in the first place. They didn't sell it for its market value. They could have sat on it for a bit longer, but perhaps they're worried about that because RBS is pretty close to bankruptcy.
There we are, one rule for us, another one for the government, and we're going to end on this very important note. If you haven't seen this, Google search for it. The Herald article on Our Place, Our Base, Plymouth City Council attempting to close down free speech on the internet. Gentleman in the picture, D, was trying to get the truth out about all sorts of dirty deals going on in Plymouth City Council. And what happens? The council target the site using one of these, a community protection notice, and this simply allows council officers to make a decision. So we are now seeing web media closed down, or the potential to close it down on the say-so as the council. There is a court case in Plymouth this Friday, 2 p.m, Plymouth Magistrates Court if you can be there. That brings us to the end of the news today. Thank you for joining us, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nilu. And, well, what a state of affairs. David Cameron's Conservative Britain, a dictatorship in 2015. Stop it, to stop it, expose it. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.